How old is the Earth?
Well, it's older now than it was the last time, so still pretty old. Hey again, Irreligionauts. I'm here today with another very special episode. Well, maybe not that special. But as promised, we're returning to the wonderful world of creationism. And in this video is irrefutable proof of creation that I will subsequently try to refute. From why oil deposits don't indicate a young Earth to why deserts don't suggest the biblical flood. We've got it all. The floating tube TV satellite thing is all tuned in. Let's see just what kind of crazy comes out. Welcome to Evidence versus Truth in Genesis Part 2, Oil-etric Boogaloo.
The Sahara Desert has a prevailing wind pattern. The wind almost always blows the same direction. This causes the desert to grow. The process is called desertification.
That's interesting, but winds are not the only cause of deserts. Some form due to precipitation being blocked by various landscape obstructions. When mountains interfere with rain clouds, for instance, it can cause an area on the other side of the mountain range to receive little to no rain, also causing desertification. Another fun fact is that not all deserts are so-called hot deserts. For example, Antarctica is considered to be a desert, albeit a very cold one, but I'm not sure just how any of this plays into your worldview. But I'm sure you're going to blow my mind with a prevailing wind? I'm sorry. You don't have to laugh at my puns, but don't expect them to stop.
They did an in-depth study of the Sahara Desert and came to the conclusion that the Sahara Desert is probably about 4,000 years old. So the desert started growing about 4,000 years ago. If the Earth is millions of years old, why is there not a bigger desert somewhere? Why would the biggest desert on the planet be less than 4,000 years old?
Indeed, parts of the Sahara are not all that old, though some recent discoveries do suggest that the desertification for much of the area may have occurred in the more distant past, and it was only for a brief period of less arid conditions in the past 10,000 years or so that would have led to the re-desertification of which you are referring. It is also true that the Sahara is one of the largest deserts on the planet. However, as mentioned earlier, Antarctica is not only a desert, but a much bigger desert, at over 5.5 million square miles, as opposed to the Sahara's 3.6 million square mile area. The fact that the Sahara Desert is the largest hot desert doesn't indicate anything about the Earth's age. It simply indicates that the specific conditions of this type of desert forming to this size may have only recently been made possible in the last 5,000 years or so. But as has already been stated, there are many ways by which deserts form, and weather conditions on the Earth do change from time to time, which include wind patterns, as well as varying temperature and precipitation patterns.
The Bible says that 6,000 years ago God created everything. 4,400 years ago there was a worldwide flood. It's pretty hard to have a desert under a worldwide flood. So I predict that the oldest desert should be less than 4,400 years old. And it is. Again, God's word is truth.
If a worldwide flood did occur, and the entirety of the Earth was being covered in water just 5,000 years or so ago, then the oldest desert being less than 5,000 years would be expected. However, the Sahara being the largest hot climate desert doesn't make it the oldest, as a simple Google search would show that the Namib Desert is thought to be over 50 million years old, and while not as large as the Sahara, is certainly much, much older. But as far as even the Sahara goes, there are parts of it that are older by far than the 5,000 year upper age limit your worldview places on it. In fact, many scientists think that the age of the Sahara Desert as a whole is around the 7 million year mark, and that only relatively recently, around 10,000 years ago, the desert received heavy monsoon rains that led to the Sahara becoming a large habitable savanna-type region. Then, with the changing weather conditions a little over 5,000 years ago, the re-desertification of the Sahara took place. And this is thought to be the case due to evidence, including research on sand deposits in the area of Chad, dating back millions of years. So, your move.
Sometimes when they drill into the ground they hit oil. And these oil wells can have up to 20,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. That is a lot of pressure. 20,000 psi. The people that have studied this have concluded that the rock can only hold that pressure for about 10,000 years or less. They say it should have cracked the rock and leaked off in less than 10,000 years. So now I have two questions. Where did the oil come from, and why is it still under pressure?
So you doubt the origin of oil and the fact that it can exist under pressure? Sorry. Well, as far as the process by which oil is typically created, when large amounts of organic material, most often thought to be microorganisms, are buried in sediment and subjected to heat and pressure for long enough, then the end result can be petroleum. From the initial organic material, through mostly endothermic reactions, a substance known as kerogen is formed, a substance that contains polymers created from the deconstructed hydrogen and carbon of the former organics. After more heat, and longer time, this kerogen can lead to the formation of the hydrocarbon chains we know of as petroleum, or crude oil. This is why it is often referred to as a fossil fuel. Though in truth the amount of time for the organic materials buried to become what we know of as crude oil isn't known, it is thought to be on the order of hundreds of thousands of years. But even though we don't know how long exactly is required for the oil to cook at its source, we do know the time periods that some of the oil came from by dating the layers at which the oil sources are found, such as the Upper Jurassic supplying much of Saudi Arabia's oil. In fact, we have learned much about oil, due in no small part because so many of our industries, and many of our lives, depend on it. In fact, oil companies themselves have a particularly vested interest in knowing how oil forms, and have contributed much to the discipline of petroleum geology. I know, it's surprising that the desire to make money can be a great motivator in learning. Who would have thought? But the idea that substances like oil can have an organic origin have been around since at least the 1700s, when Russian scientist Mikhail Lomonosov speculated as much. It is believed, though, that abiogenic oil is also a potential source of some small portion of Earth's oils. That is, oil originating from non-living source materials. However, the amount of oil they contribute to the total amount of oil being produced is considered negligible. That's the short answer to where oil comes from, at least as we currently understand it. As far as it not being able to exist in a pressurized state for more than 10,000 years without leaking off, well, it's a lengthy answer, but here goes something. So the first point, the place where oil is often recovered, at the bottom of a wellbore, is not always the source of the oil, but merely the place where it has ended up, after following very much the process you described. As pressure builds during the cooking process, in the source rock of oil creation, often called the kitchen, some of the hydrocarbons may become gaseous type hydrocarbons, like natural gas, and attempt to bleed off, while others may form the heavy, fluid-like substance we know of as crude oil, which, as pressure builds, will also try to escape, finding their way from their kitchen or source rock through many types of porous rocks until the mixture of gaseous hydrocarbons and oil find themselves in what is often called a trap. And, trap jokes aside, this is where oil is most often recovered. Oil traps are most often formed when the oil seeps into a porous and permeable rock that is covered with a considerably less porous, almost impermeable layer of sediment, usually known as a cap rock. This process is called migration, and it can span many miles, and is a big area of research for oil companies' geologists, as knowing where oil originates and where it collects can be very profitable for them. So oil doesn't necessarily have to stay pressurized in one place for 10,000 years. It can move around, and will only stay in a reservoir rock, or oil trap, if the conditions to prevent it from escaping are sufficient. As to the comment, how is it still under pressure when we tap into it? Well, when oil is trapped in porous rocks and not able to escape, such as in the way we mentioned earlier, more molecules of the oil become tightly packed and the overall pressure increases. Though as long as the internal pressure doesn't outweigh the other acting pressures, like those of the overlaying layers of sediment, including the cap rock, the oil will be pressurized but may not escape. This pressure found in oil traps is often factored in when the drilling process is being planned, and that is done in the form of the pore pressure gradient, which when calculated is basically the numeric value given to the pressure and direction of said pressure inside a well bore, from the oil trap up to the surface, which, if not calculated properly in the drilling process, can lead to a blowout, which just illustrates a simple truth. Basically, the oil trapped inside rocks is under more pressure than oil that is at the surface. So, yeah. Wait, what was your question again?
Most scientists agree that oil comes from organisms that are changed by heat and pressure, turning them into oil, and it does not take millions of years to make oil. In 1971, they learned how to make oil in 20 minutes in the laboratory. In 1996, a proposal was approved in Western Australia that would build a plant to create oil from sewage sludge in just 30 minutes.
So you think that humans' abilities to create things in lab conditions, man-made oil, in 30 minutes or so, as you say, somehow implies that nature would also achieve the same measure of success in a naturally occurring process. That would mean that by your reasoning, the millions or billions of years taken during the process of natural diamond formation is a lie, because lab-created diamonds don't take even a fraction of the time. That's pretty fucking stupid. The fact that a process takes less time in a directed, purpose-driven situation under near-perfect lab conditions with a clear outcome in mind than in a natural setting directed primarily through chance occurrences with no clear motivation or predetermined outcome makes sense. The fact that humans can make things like fire happen relatively quickly and often, as opposed to waiting for the same occurrences in nature, just means that the methods of learning and understanding humans have at their disposal is impressive. So, yeah. And with that, I'm pretty much done for now. This video is getting a bit on the long side, but to push one point, even if, and it's a big if, any of the points you raise in your video were correct, and they don't appear to be, but if one of the things you mentioned was true, such as the Sahara being only 4,000 or 5,000 years old, or the moon's recession occurring at a rate inconsistent in your opinion with the estimated age of the Earth, that still doesn't invalidate every other piece of evidence that demonstrates the age of the Earth being counted in the billions. And it certainly doesn't prove your assumption of a 6,000-year-old world. At best, it shows there are some mysteries left to solve, and scientific inquiry will be the method by which that occurs, not interpretations derived from an ancient religious text. But then again, I don't think your argument even deserves that much credit. It is a long way away from being truth, in Genesis or otherwise. Have yourselves a science-tastic day.